It's the question that drives us. It's the question that brought you here. So plug in, free your mind. Welcome to Echoes of Eternity.
Have you ever sat in a room across from someone, or lucky enough to have an encounter with someone, and then shortly after whispered to yourself, that person is going to do great things one day? Well, our guest today is exactly that person for me. Graduating with a Master's in Economic Science from the University of the Witwatersrand, he is the winner of several economics awards, including the All Mutual Budget Speech Competition and the United Nations Special Youth Prize. It comes as no surprise that he's held several research roles, including one at the International Monetary Fund. If you do not find this fashionable gentleman on the award stage or stuck in his research, you will find him working tirelessly, contributing towards the reindustrialization of South Africa through his manufacturing company, Mebala. Mebala is a manufacturer of custom handmade leather products ranging from backpacks and laptop bags all the way to belts and wallets. Boasting some of the most unique designs I've seen, these products are true to the Made in Africa initiative. I am so thrilled to present to you Tlhalefang Moeletsi. Tlhalefang, welcome to Echoes of Eternity.
Thank you, Shamil. That was a fire intro.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. You can find Tlhalefang on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X, previously known as Twitter. And more importantly, if you'd like to get your hands on a custom-made leather bag, then check out the Mebala Instagram page or website. I'll obviously be dropping all these details for you in the description or notes sections. Tlhalefang, it's so great to have you here, man. We're finally doing this.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot we wanted to chat about today, but I want to start us off where I recall back in school, you were fairly quiet, at least that is my perception of you, but you were definitely one of the kindest people I was fortunate enough to have an encounter with. And I knew, you'd be an amazing economist. But I would have never guessed that you would go out one day looking for a bag and then come back having created Mebala. And we'll chat about that. But first, one of your flagship products is the bag that is shaped like the African continent, the shape of lasagna. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to travel yet in Africa, but if you ever had the opportunity, which country would you like to visit one day? And maybe tell us a bit, about the country or why you'd like to visit the country.
Yeah, definitely. I've had the opportunity to travel to a few African countries, including Egypt, and neighboring countries, Botswana, Eswatini, and so on, Kenya and the likes. But I think that there's a couple of countries that are on my bucket list, and I think at the top would be Ghana, because I haven't had the opportunity to go to West Africa yet, so I think Ghana would be a good first start, because they inspire, Africa in general inspires a lot of our work, the patterns that we use, the colors that we use, our monograms and so on. We try to celebrate and elevate African creativity in our work. And Ghana is one of those countries that has been a big inspiration for our work. We've previously imported kente woven fabric from Ghana, with like these exquisite patterns, high quality woven fabric that we've used in some of our products. And of course, Ghana was the first independent country in the continent. So I feel like they carry that significance in the continent. And I think they have very exquisite food as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to say, you can't visit any country for that matter and not at least try something from the country itself. Now, it sounds amazing, and I'm sure if you do ever get the opportunity to visit, there'll be lots of inspiration that can be found there that you can bring back, not just for yourself but obviously for Mebala as well.
100%.
Fantastic. Now, my understanding is that you grew up in Papong,
Yeah.
right? For those that are not too familiar, it's a small village, I'd like to say, in the northwest province of South Africa.
Yeah.
Can you briefly paint a picture for us of what life was like growing up there? What was little Tlhalefang doing, in Papong?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a village called Bapong. It's in the Northwest Province, just outside of Rustenburg, so very close to Sun City. About like a 15-minute drive away from Sun City. So Sun City is a very important source of jobs, followed by mining in the area. So yeah, a very happy childhood, a very, very playful childhood. So lots of playing and falling and breaking bones and getting dirty in the mud. And so a lot of five-a-side thing. Yeah. So,
You're bringing back some good memories there, my friend.
yeah, a lot of five-a-side. Sometimes with like soccer balls that we would hand make from plastic bags, right? A lot of playing in the mud, especially when it had rained. We would build these cities out of mud. Racing little ships that we made out of cardboard down the streams after it had rained. A lot of hunting. So there were a lot of surrounding forests in our village and some mountains. So we used to go looking for wild fruit. We used to go hunting for birds, eagles, rabbits, and the rest of it. I mean, we were much more successful with the fruits than the animals. But yeah, it was a lot of adventure.
No, it sounds like incredible. I mean, you're bringing back lots of good memories for myself as well. I think it's something, I don't want to say we take for granted, but maybe don't reflect upon enough is the childhood and, the time that we had outdoors. We're almost forced to find ways of entertaining ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that as well, even in your own childhood, making the cities out of the mud and the ships out of cardboard, even the soccer ball out of plastic. No one sort of said, here's a soccer ball or here's a plastic ship, whatever. You kind of just sat there and played around, and then you came up with something.
Yeah, exactly.
And this was my ship. Is that about right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, and I try to, when I ventured into entrepreneurship and creativity, I also made that realization that number one, freedom really inspires creativity, right? And that has come to be like one of the principles that I try and use to guide our work. If you are allowed to create from a place of freedom, you can really come up with interesting ideas. You can improvise. You can find ways. So yeah, because we were free to play, and it's like, okay, it was raining, but the rain has now stopped. You can go and play outside. Then you try and use what's around you to like entertain yourself. So you end up being very creative and improvising in like in interesting ways.
No, I think I echo that sentiment 100%. And you touched on something quite important. This having a sense of freedom to create. Maybe let's explore that just a little bit and define, what does that mean to have that freedom? Because, obviously it's not for everyone, but for some of us, it's much easier to find that sense of freedom when we are doing our own thing, or, you're trying to create a startup or something. You allow for that. But if you're in a corporate job, for example, right, that sense of freedom is a bit restricted in a sense. So let's maybe explore that. How do you define freedom, or how do you find that sense of freedom to allow you to be creative?
Yeah, 100%. And that observation that you made there is a really good one and an important one in terms of the extent to which you can be free in a corporate setting. And I think this is why a lot of people, a lot of creatives, a lot of entrepreneurial people end up maybe being a little bit disillusioned with corporate because, as companies grow and they corporatize, then they have these processes and these rules and these guidelines and these parameters because it's a big ship and they want the big ship to keep sailing in the right direction, right? But then that comes at the compromise of innovation, creativity, improvisation, new solutions, and it's why whenever there's innovation, the innovation always comes from startups typically. It's because, as you said, in a startup, that room to that freedom to like create is afforded, right? If you look at smartphones, for example, a lot of people are disillusioned with the level of innovation that we've had in smartphones over the past few years. Maybe folding capabilities, maybe the only interesting thing that has happened. But phones have just only been marginally increasing. And that's because most of the phone companies are now large corporates and they're finding it difficult to create the room, the freedom for innovation. So I'd say the most innovative phone company right now is the Nothing company with their phone 1 and phone 2. And then if you look at it, the startup. So it's only a few corporates that still have that entrepreneurial spirit where people are allowed to create from a place of freedom. And you see this in the culture and the product, especially the product. So Tesla, I would say, is like an example of a company that is a big corporate, but looks like it still has a culture of freedom, right? And freedom for me is the aren't too many parameters that are given to you in the way that you work, right? So in the manufacturing department, for example, well, let me start with the design department. In the design department, for example, you're told that you can design this thing however you are inspired to design it.
Wow. There's complete freedom.
Complete freedom.
Yeah.
You know what our design language is. You know what our, the kinds of products that we like to create. That's the only limitation that we're giving you. Go and create. And that's how they came back with the Cybertruck, right? That's because they were designing without any parameters about how a pickup truck is supposed to look like and how it's not supposed to look like. So they came up with something that's totally unconventional. And then even in their manufacturing process, the way they make it, instead of like this very long assembly line where each component is slowly put into the truck, they have a giga press which makes a majority of the body like in one go. So that solution came from a place of freedom, like stepping back from the norm and then saying like, is there a better way to do this? So for me, freedom is that, it's that space where you allow someone to step back from the norm, where you remove the parameters that you're allowing someone to work under, and then you're just saying to them, give us a solution. But very difficult to have it in corporate.
Agreed. I think you hit the nail on the head there, though. It's that ability to step back. I mean, yes, so in corporate, you have the rules. I mean, I was there, I know about the rules, right? But it's so important to have that ability to step back and ask yourself the question, can this be done differently? What would the solution look like if I didn't have these parameters? And then sort of bring back, the solution or the thinking within your bounds. But at least you've given yourself that opportunity to think creatively, to innovate, and you do find that you can come up with some really fantastic solutions. No, thanks for sharing that with us, Tlhalefang. I want to just go back quickly to your childhood. You triggered something for me. I think you mentioned like Tesla and whatnot. So Steve Jobs came to mind for me there. And he said, you cannot connect the dots by looking forward. You can only connect them by looking backwards. And you spoke of your childhood and how it was probably such a pivotal time in your life, although you didn't realize it at the time. Do you feel like there were, specific moments in your childhood that has, inspired or influenced the solution-oriented mindset that you have today?
I wonder. I'd say school was also school also played a role.
Definitely.
The those technology subjects that we were doing, where you were just finding like these small solutions to problems. I think that played a role for sure. The arts and culture and all of the sketching that I was doing definitely played a role. In particular, the high school subjects that I was doing, I think also played a role. Because in high school, I was very much on the engineering track.
Wow, okay, incredible.
Yeah, doing mechanical technology and engineering, graphics and design and so on, and it's helped with my work now. So there was that shift when I went to university. But for sure, especially all that sketching. And I didn't know it at the time. Yeah, but I used to sketch everything and anything I could get my hands on. Dragon Ball Z posters.
Yes. In fact, I've done that as well.
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool, man. Fascinating. It's important. I feel like just to reflect back on those moments. We don't always do it, and at the time we don't realize how it plays a role in our bigger journey. But everything is there for a reason, right?
100%.
Now I've titled this episode, what you seek is seeking you, which is a quote from the 13th century poet Rumi. And I think it couldn't be more fitting for you, and that's why I picked this title. You went out one day, right? And you were looking for a bag and you couldn't find it. I couldn't find this fact anyway, so you have to let us know what bag exactly was it that you couldn't find.
Yeah, exactly. I had this idea in my head, and I could see this backpack, and I knew that if I ever found it in a shop, I would know that this is the one. So it had to have like a timeless design of a backpack, So, those vintage backpacks where you have a flap and then you use a drawstring. I was looking for something like that. But then in addition to it kind of being based on leather, in terms of the structure, I also wanted it to be unique, to be different, in that it had to use African print, right? Because at the time I was loving African print. I think this was my master's year. So I was getting a lot of African print clothing for myself, both casual and formal. And I was just like falling in love with African print. And I was like, this print in a leather backpack, a vintage design would be something so cool.
Yes. No, I agree. That's why I mentioned fashionable gentleman. I remember those days. No. Okay, so then, you reached a point and you were like, enough, because you obviously couldn't find it.
I can't find it.
Exactly, and I think we all have these moments of frustration from time to time. How did you go from, this moment of frustration to daring to establish something like Mebala?
So, initially, when I decided that I'm going to make the bag, the decision wasn't to start a company. It was just to make a product, not even a product for the people, just a product for myself. Because I want this bag and I can't find it. And the design is very clear in my mind. So I sketched the design. There was a gentleman in Bramfontein, a shoe cobbler, who used to fix my shoes when I was a student. So I sketched the design. I show him the design. He's like, I can do this. And then, being my resourceful self, I venture into downtown Joburg and I get the leather that I want. I get the African print that I want. And then this gentleman helps me find the fittings for the bag. So the zippers, the D-rings, all those metal hardware that you need. So we've got the material, I give him the sketch, and then he makes the bag. And it comes out looking really exquisite, number one. And then number two, it comes out looking very different, right? Unlike anything else that's out there. So I like the bag. I'm using the bag, carrying it around in Braamfontein, and I'm getting lots of compliments. But in addition to the compliments, I'm also getting questions. Where did you buy the bag? It's interesting. It's different. It's beautiful. And I think when the third person asked, where did you buy the bag? I was like, I sell them. And then that's essentially how the company started. So right then and there, same day, quickly set up a Facebook shop page. Used my phone to get some quick product photos. And the company was established.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's incredible. And I think, thanks for sharing that story. And I think it's also something that's so important for us to be more aware of, right? Like you said, you were walking around now with this very unique looking backpack, and people were giving you compliments and then asking you questions. I think you had then the ability to be aware of what they were actually asking, and then something like, clicked in your mind to say, here's like an opportunity for me, or maybe this is what I want to do, right? I want to help others, and, I want to sell this product, which is incredible. Now I'm sure all startups have, their unique set of, let's call them technical, challenges, right? But what were some of like the emotional challenges you had to overcome? Because, like I said, the technical stuff can be unique, but sometimes the emotional challenges that go into, or that, you're faced with when starting up something, can be quite common. I mean, I know this now firsthand as well. There's moments where you're discouraged, especially in the beginning, and you're like, this is not for me, it's not going to work. There's almost like those paralyzing states. What were some of those, emotional challenges you had to overcome, and how did you manage to overcome them?
For sure. So just to touch on the point that you made earlier, that awareness, I think is important to like seize the moment, right? Because I think another response could have been to say to people, my cobbler can make them for you if you buy your own material and you buy the leather. So fortunately, I was aware at the time that this might mean that there's a particular gap in the market that isn't being filled. And so far as not only the specific design is concerned, but also people being able to access custom-made bags. That like constant awareness, I feel like, is important. And then to come back to your question, you're absolutely spot on. Someone said to me, you mentioned my career as an economist. I currently work as a senior associate at Genesis Analytics, and I work for a division that advises a lot of foundations and governments and the development community at large about how to support entrepreneurs, among other things. So we help design, implement and evaluate projects that try and support entrepreneurship. And from that experience and that knowledge, and importantly from my own personal experience, I've come to the same realization that the mindset and the resilience is maybe like the biggest asset that you can have as an entrepreneur. because the technical challenges will be there. And oftentimes, if you sit in a calm space with your team and so on and so forth, you can find solutions. But it's about being able to have that resilience to bounce back from like problems and challenges that are constantly coming your way, and to not let that distract the bigger vision that you have, to not let that affect your belief, your confidence, your execution as well in particular. Because if you start feeling down, you start feeling a little bit negative, and then it starts to affect your execution, it's going to affect how the business is going. Then you're stuck in a cycle, right? Because you're feeling this way, the business isn't doing well, and the business isn't doing well, and it makes you feel that way even more. So there's been a lot of self-doubt in my journey, particularly at the beginning. And I think this was also linked to the fact that I knew nothing about fashion. At least.
But you had your product page up on Facebook.
but I'm live.
Yeah.
I'm in the fashion space. I'm live. The shop page is live on Facebook, and others are gonna come in. I'm like, I know nothing about fashion. At least manufacturing, at least I understood theoretically, because I've always been interested in like how to make things. And I studied economics, and microeconomics was like a particularly interesting topic for me. So at least the industrial side of things, the operational side of things, at least theoretically understood it. But fashion, didn't understand it theoretically, had no experience in it. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking to say that, can I actually pull this off, right? And I was coming from a startup. So Mebala, I would say, is my second startup. I was coming from a first startup with a couple of friends that had failed dramatically. So there was also that thought in my mind to say that, I haven't proven that I'm a good entrepreneur. So is this going to be another failure? And, I don't really think that voice ever goes away. It hasn't gone away from me, because the challenges never stop coming. And what I've understood is that usually the difference between the entrepreneurs that end up being successful and those that don't is the mindset, right? So it's about like constantly being able to come back to a place where you calm yourself down, you remind yourself of, the successes that you've had. You think calmly about the situation that you're in, and then you try to find a solution. But self-doubt, fear of failure, feelings of inadequacies, haunted me, and still continue to haunt me in some instances even now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for sharing that. Just this is all new for me as well, and you know this very well. So it's a bit comforting as well for me to know that, we go through this. And if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that it never really goes away. And, then we can bring it back to you, the importance of, like you said, the mindset, your resilience, and also your self-talk.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You don't want to get stuck, like you said, in that cycle of negativity.
Yeah.
And you did that, right? Like, is that how you built your resilience as well? You just, went back to, what your initial vision was, and you let that carry you and drive you forward. And you look back at your successes as well, and, those moments of positivity.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important for all of us to remember. Not just, entrepreneurs and stuff, but even in corporate, the same applies. It applies everywhere in life, not just, whether you're in the world of work or not.
Yeah.
It's so important to have the right mindset in anything you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned as well that you could have easily told people, no, I got it from that shoe cobbler, buy your material here, and go there and you can get the same bag that I have. I'll give you my sketch kind of thing. But, your desire to solve your own problem of, I couldn't find, sort of evolved to helping others, right? Or wanting to help others. You saw an opportunity, fair enough. Yeah. But, there's also this larger element at play where you felt a desire to serve, right? Because that's what manufacturers do. I mean, you're creating a product, but the product you're creating are bags, right? And in some ways, it's a service that you're providing, and you're also creating employment, 100%. Right? What is that drive for you to make an impact? Where does it stem from? This wanting to create employment, wanting to contribute to the reindustrialization of South Africa, wanting to offer unique products to South Africans and the world.
Yeah. Thank you for that. My fulfillment, number one, comes from doing things that I feel like are bigger than myself. And I think that's maybe the first thing that kind of drives me to keep, to keep going as far as I can, and to keep exceeding what I think could be my barriers, right? So that gives me a lot of fulfillment, and it makes me feel like I'm using the talents that God has blessed me with. And then the second thing is that I think, number one, my background. So when I was very young, back home in the village where I grew up, it's all like happiness, right? You're too young to understand exactly what's happening in the community. But I think the more I grew up, particularly in my teen years, and started to understand that actually there's a lot of poverty in our community, and there's a lot of challenges, the more it became an interesting problem for me. And it just became more and more interesting as I grew up, and as I understood the significance of the challenge. And it started, my understanding of it started to grow from just understanding it at the local level in my community, but to understanding it for South Africa as a whole, for Africa as a continent, and for the global South. So, yeah, that question has always nagged me to say that, why is there so much economic injustice is what I call it. And economic injustice for me means that not everyone is getting the same opportunity to participate meaningfully in the economy for one reason or the other, legacy issues, discrimination, whatever. And the outcome of that is the inequality, the poverty, and the unemployment that we see. So that problem always nagged me, and I think that's why I ended up studying economics, was to say, okay, let me try and understand how economies work, so that I can, help come up with these solutions for some of the challenges that we're seeing. Because, I've always enjoyed problem solving, and then I decided that for me, this was the problem that was worthwhile to solve in my career. So what was interesting with Mebala, and I only came to this realization later on, is that it then actually became a culmination of all of my passions, right? Because additionally, I am very much a creative, so I'm quite analytical, but I enjoy creative work, whether it's coming up with a marketing campaign and doing a photo shoot or video shoot, or sketching up a new product. I enjoy creative work, and I also I'm fascinated with innovation. Products that solve real challenges that people face. So, and I'm also very interested in industrialization and manufacturing processes, whether it's manufacturing cereal, it's manufacturing cars or cell phones. I spend a lot of time just like looking at industrialization. So, Mebala then became this platform or this vehicle where all of the passions that I had were culminating. My passion for creative work, product development, design, manufacturing, and the industrial sector, as well as trying to contribute to tackling economic injustice. So everything just came together all at once, and I realized that if we launch this as a company, and we offer this platform that can make custom-made bags for people. We will be providing clients with products that solve their day-to-day challenges, that give them some use value, but we'll also be providing an opportunity for communities to be involved in manufacturing. And the decline of the manufacturing sector, particularly in South Africa, has been one of the biggest challenges that we've had over the past 3 decades, right? So there was a time where manufacturing was contributing upwards of 20% to GDP. Now it's as low as like 12%. And when you look at all of the countries that have been able to pull their populations out of poverty, what usually happens is that they shift from being an agriculture-based economy into an economy that industrializes and has a mix of manufacturing and services. We in South Africa did the opposite, where we prematurely deindustrialized. So the manufacturing sector became less and less important as a source for jobs. And the services sector became more and more important. And the services sector is typically high paying, right? Because financial services, etc., etc. But the challenge is that it's very skills intensive. And South Africa's labor force doesn't have those skills, primarily because of the challenges we have in basic education. So one of the glaring solutions for the challenges that we face as a country and as a continent is to actually reindustrialize and grow our manufacturing sectors again. And so I looked at it and I was like, we need to reindustrialize. So what is it that we can make in the continent to not only serve the continent in terms of the needs that exist here, but to potentially also export globally. And so I was like, okay, let's make these bags. Let's lean into African creativity, African patterns, use all of that in our designs. And I started to make products that solve challenges that people have, products that can be appealing to an international market, and ultimately create jobs. Because we could have very well decided that we're going to import all of our products from China at a much cheaper labor rate, it could have maybe doubled our current profit margin. But then the value add is going to stay in China. Yes. And while the consumption will be in the continent, the social impact is going to be missing, because we would only come in at the very end.
I mean, there's so much that you've touched on there, and yeah, I actually am very inspired by your drive to make an impact. You can see you thinking a lot larger than yourself, right? It's not about me, it's about others, and it's about service. Service is the golden key almost. There's just one thing I want you to just, re-emphasize, and you mentioned it, and I myself have never thought about it this way before. But you said, growing up, in the environments you grew up in, and what you saw and what you didn't see and what you were trying to then solve, influence your decision to study economics. And I think I just want to re-emphasize that point because there's so many students out there today that are not sure if they're studying the right thing or don't even know what career choice they should kind of pursue. And I think your story in that little segment there, I think is such a good starting point. How do I want to make a difference? And then, kind of say, is this the career for me where I can make, a difference, or that's going to enable me to make that difference? At the same time, though, like you said, Mebala was then a culmination of all your passions coming together. However, at the time, it's very difficult to see that, you sketching your Dragon Ball Z posters and whatnot, and then, always being into fashion and then enjoying manufacturing. At the time, you could never imagine all of that coming together, right? So also important not to be hard on yourself. If you feel like, right now, this is not how I make my impact, or, I'm not enjoying this, you never know down the line where, it will come back and sort of help you on your journey, because everything is there for a reason. I think there's just one more thing I want to touch on before we get to our reflection segment, and that's, diversification.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get more diverse than Mebala, right? You guys literally stitch together pieces of leather that, different colors, different patterns, etc. Why do you feel like it's so important for us, not, just as individuals, but as brands and companies, to celebrate that diversification? And I'll ask the question again, but the reason I think it's so important to touch on this point is because diversification can sometimes feel like, it divides us.
Yeah.
From our language to our art to our culture, it's all different, right?
Yeah.
So why is it important to celebrate diversification and that beautiful oneness that's actually found in diversification?
So for me, what's cool about diversification, as you said, is when it all comes together. It creates like this beautiful mixed pot, right? That's one of the things that South Africa is such a beautiful country. The Rainbow Nation, as you like to call it, with all of the challenges that we have, it's because it's a culmination of so many different cultures and experiences and backgrounds and heritages, such that when it all comes together, it brings this like one very special, one of a kind country experience. So diversification for me is important because, like, for lack of a better phrase, it just brings flavor to life and to the world, and especially when it all comes together. Yeah.
No, I think that's well said. Agreed, and I love our country for that, and I'm sure every country has a rainbow nation, but I think no one does it like South Africa.
Exactly.
No, cool. Tlhalefang, thanks for being here with us today as well and for sharing everything that you did. Reflections. Let's chat about that. So the reflection segment is where we ask our guests to bring along with them either an object or a quote that has had some impact on their journey or is just personally meaningful to them. So Tlhalefang, what are we reflecting on today?
What I brought today is a quote that inspires me quite a lot on a day-to-day basis. And it inspires me because I feel like the vision that we have is really big. And sometimes I'm like, ooh, is this too big? So it's a quote by Margaret Mead. And she says that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that has ever changed the world. So, wow. Yeah, exactly. So like as a small company there, like 6 people that are just committed to this vision that is sometimes overwhelming. I go back to this quote a lot to say that a small group of people, if they're thoughtful, if they're committed, if they're aligned, if they're resourceful, if they work hard, if they work smart, can change the world.
No, I think that's sure. Like I got goosebumps when you said that, because I think it ties together your whole story brilliantly. It speaks volumes to exactly your story, right? I mean, you wanting to make an impact, wanting to change things, and you've done exactly that. You've thought more than just about yourself, but you've thought about the country and the world. That quote ties everything so nicely together. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for making the time to be here with us today as well. It's always inspiring to hear people's stories and hearing, just to hear from them how they want to make an impact in the world. And so thank you for that and for sharing with us.
Thank you, Shamil. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. So really, really appreciate the platform.
Awesome, you're welcome, and I can't wait to see what comes next for you and for Mebala as well.
Thank you.
Cool.